Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the Warsaw Royal Castle, an estate that served as a residence for king and monarchs of Poland for centuries. Follow me and my guests as we unravel the story and history of this amazing place on Poland Daily History. As the last king of the Jagiellonian dynasty, Sigismund II Augustus died without an heir in 1572. The Polish nobility came up with a new method of electing kings. The Convocation Parliament of 1573 decided also on new measures which gave them even more influence over the monarch. Poland had united with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the Union of Lublin 4 years earlier, meaning that the two entities formed Europe's largest democratic organism at the time. Next up, we will speak with Marcin Skalski-Truskolaski, a historian and expert on heraldry, genealogy, and everything relating to the Polish nobility. To illustrate the spirit of the time, he is dressed as a Polish nobleman of the era. During the 16th century, the role of the Polish parliament has a little bit of shift in what it was doing because now they're required to elect a new king. How does that fare into the existing parliamentary system, and what are the dynamics when it comes to that?
W XVI wieku następuje wygaśnięcie dynastii jagiellońskiej.
The Jagiellonian dynasty comes to an end in the 16th century. The last king of the Jagiellonian dynasty on the throne, Sigismund Augustus, dies. There is an interregnum. Even though the Jagiellons were chosen in a sort of elections, it was still the continuation of a dynasty. In the system of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, there was no such rule allowing a dying monarch to hand the state over to another dynasty in his testament.
Umierający monarcha mógł zapisać w testamencie.
Here, it was the citizens, meaning the nobility, that made the decisive decision. With the royal dynasty of Jagiellons having died out in 1573, the so-called Convocation Parliament convenes. It is decided that the MPs will use majority voting to elect a new king. The first elections, in many regards, this is thanks to Jan Zamoyski, who can be considered to be the father of this system, later known as the nobility's democracy. The Convocation Parliament was the first time where all the representatives of nobility from Poland and Lithuania were able to choose a new king in direct elections. Every nobleman who could show up at the so-called electoral field where the elections were taking place could vote for one of the candidates. In the first elections, French Prince Henri de Valois stood against Austrian Archduke Ernest Habsburg. The French prince won this first election, the first free elections in Poland, a democratic vote for a monarch. This was something unheard of in Europe. On one hand, a ruler was chosen, just like a president is elected now, by anyone eligible to vote, and this is indirect election by everyone with the right to vote.
Wybierano władcę, tak jak dzisiaj wybiera się prezydenta.
It is important to note that the basic rights and privileges in Poland allowed any member of the Polish and Lithuanian nobility to become a king. However, in practice, elections were big league politics, and important, powerful candidates were elected. In result, the nobleman elected became something between a king who is anointed by God, who is a deacon, and something of a president-like figure democratically elected by the nobility. A very important decision of the Convocation Parliament is the adoption of the Henrysian Articles and the Pacta Conventa, which secure that the electorate, the nobility that is, get a guarantee that previous rights given to them cannot be taken away by the new king. One can see this as a way of making sure the execution of a particular political program and abidance of the laws enacted. If the king doesn't abide by these laws, the nobility have the right to cast him aside. If he doesn't follow the law and doesn't go through with his electoral obligations, they have the right to impeach him. This is a very important meaning, and as we know, the king elected at the Convocation Parliament, the French Prince Henri de Valois, couldn't take the pressure placed on him by our democracy and ran away from Poland, so we had to have new elections, very successful ones at that.
Nie wytrzymał tej presji demokracji, po prostu z Polski uciekł, także musieliśmy robić nową elekcję, bardzo zresztą udaną.
So the nobilities in the country has the right to declare confederacy, which is push back against the king. And I was wondering, how did that look like, and what are the details of said confederacy?
Tak, więc tutaj mamy właściwie pojęcie konfederacji i rokoszu, bo przyjęło się mówić, że
Here we have the concept of the confederacy and a rokosz. A confederacy organized against the king without his approval was a rokosz, an illegal rebellion by the nobility. The confederacy is linked to an interregnum period. When there was no king, there was a so-called confederate parliament in which a majority vote rule was in place. Confederacies had an important role during times of political uncertainty or during the collapse of royal power. For example, during the Swedish deluge, a confederacy was formed when the king was forced to leave the borders of the Republic. At one point, King John II Casimir Vaza was forced to take refuge in Silesia, and then confederacies formed in Poland to fight on the side of King John II Casimir Vaza to get back his authority.
się w pewnym momencie na Śląsku. W Polsce powstawały konfederacje, które walczyły po stronie króla.
A rokosz was a not completely legal gathering of nobility against the king's rule, such as the rokosz in Zebrzdowice against King Sigismund III Vaza's outbursts of absolutist rule. That was the most famous rokosz to take place during Sigismund III's rule, and it was connected to the famous Inquisition Parliament, during which a legal court case was actually pursued against the king. This was something extraordinary in the European context. It would be unimaginable in other countries that a king could be sentenced in a procedure that we today would probably call an impeachment. So this was the way in which a confederacy or a rokosz would work, and these were without a doubt two very important features of the Polish parliamentary system.
Konfederacja i rokosz to tak funkcjonowało i było to jednym z istotnych elementów polskiego parlamentaryzmu, bardzo ważnym.
The House of Wettin, a German dynasty from Saxony, ascended the Polish throne in 1697 when Augustus II, the Strong, was elected King of Poland by the Polish nobility. It was during his rule that the Silent Parliament took place, an event considered to be the final Russian nail in the coffin of Polish sovereignty. Our guest is Łukasz Jędrzejczak, a historian and longtime guide at the Warsaw Royal Castle. So as we know, the Swedish dynasty also didn't last forever. After them, followed by their footstep, are the Germans who occupied this residence. And I was wondering if you can tell me more about that.
Po abdykacji Jana Kazimierza w roku 1668
After the abdication of John Casimir Vaza II in 1668, the crown went to Michał I, Michał Korybut, and after this short reign to Jan Sobieski III, the last great warrior monarch. After his death in 1696, during an election, the crown went to the Elector of Saxony, Frederick Augustus, who took the name of Augustus II. Unfortunately, his politics in relation to his neighbors, particularly mixing Poland up in a war with Sweden in a pact with Russia and Denmark, in what is known as the Great Northern War, caused part of Poland to once again be occupied by Sweden, and the castle suffered severely under this occupation.
druga okupacja szwedzka. Pierwsza była w połowie XVII wieku, ta druga w czasie Wielkiej Wojny Północnej straszliwie odcisnęła piętno na zamku.
This was the second Swedish occupation. The first, the so-called deluge, happened midway through the 17th century. The second, because of the Great Northern War, caused the castle to be completely plundered. Floors were ripped out along with marble and gold ornaments. The Swedes completely destroyed the castle. Augustus II and his son Augustus III tried to pull the castle out of the ruins. They built an additional wing in the direction of the old town, the sixth and last wing of the castle. After the renewal of the castle, they gave it a beautiful new facade from the side of the Vistula River, built in a late Baroque and Rococo style. This facade was recreated a few years ago, and it now looks like it originally did in the 18th century. They also founded the castle gardens, which we can admire today as they are currently also being recreated.
Dzisiaj możemy podziwiać, które są również w tej chwili odnawiane.
Can you talk briefly to our audience about the Silent Parliament and how much after the event does the Polish monarchs and elites still retain their sovereignty?
W
The Swedes organized certain pacts with parts of the Polish nobility against King Augustus II during the Great Northern War, and the dispute between the king and the nobility went on until the year 1717, until at the Silent Sejm, which only went on for one day, there was a reconciliation, a so-called pacification parliament, to reconcile the nobility with the king. It was also established that the Polish army would be made up of no more than 24,000 soldiers. In comparison, Russia or Austria had armies numbering more than 100,000 men. It was a parliament that was supposed to underline the great influence the nobility has on the authorities, in turn weakening the political position of the king. The king reigned, but had no influence on how the Polish Republic was ruled after the Silent Sejm. Where does this session of parliament get its name from? None of the MPs were allowed to speak, in fear that one of them would cast his veto, which would lead to the parliament being concluded. This was a unique prerogative of Polish MPs, also known as the liberum veto. The liberum veto was overused, particularly in the 18th century, when the parliament constantly went out of session and nothing could be decided upon.
So the silent parliament, as I understand, is under heavy influence of the foreign powers. Can you elaborate on it?
The Silent Sejm conserved an ill system used in the Polish Republic, a strong freedom for the nobility combined with the corrupt practices and bickering among the most powerful of them, the so-called magnates, the weak position of the king, and let's add to that Russian interests. King Augustus II owed his regaining of the throne to Peter the Great, and indeed, particularly after the 1721 Treaty of Nystad, when Russia finally defeated Sweden in the Great Northern War and became a European power, the Polish Republic in fact became a protectorate of Russia. The Russians decided how the Polish Republic's internal and external policies would look.
Here at the Warsaw Royal Palace, we learned the history and story of Polish democracy and how the parliamentary system came to be. It later on became an influence to Europe and to the whole world. It is not just a story of the castle, but also the story of Warsaw and the story of Poland. That's it for today. See you next time on Poland Daily History.